Welcome back to the show, Science Facts and Fallacies podcast. Hope you all are having a lovely week. My name is Cameron English. That's Dr. Liza Dunn. We're here to talk about some science. What's going on, Liza?
Not much. How are you? I can't believe it's Friday already.
I am grateful. I'm grateful. I've been hanging out with my daughter all day and trying to work, which is it's like walking on a tightrope and juggling. It's not easy. So,
It goes
but
by
it's good.
really fast, though. And
I
everybody's
know.
like, oh, when you're in the throes of it with small children, you're like, oh my gosh, this is very, very busy. And then all of a sudden they go to college. It's
It's not a
incredible.
joke. It's not a joke. My wife has. I always thought they were stupid, but then she bought one of those digital picture frames with the scrolling pictures, and so I have
Uh
these
huh.
pictures of my son. They come up from like 2.5 years ago when he was just a wee little jelly bean. I'm like, oh man, I miss those days, and it's.
Yep.
So you're right. You're right. There I go reminiscing. I might shed a tear or two, everyone. That's how it goes. Okay. We got three stories to talk about as always. Let's jump right into these because I want you guys to all get to your weekends and enjoy your free time. So, first up, China bans clinical research on germline human gene editing, calling all of these technologies irresponsible. Next up, losing weight can cause cancer. Here's how epidemiologists' studies can skew science to fit ideological viewpoints. And finally, why are people suffering from rising mental health issues? Our culture and environments might be changing too fast for evolution to keep up. Alrighty, first story here. I'm honestly somewhat surprised by this, Liza, but this is from the South China Morning Post, and originally called China Bans Clinical Research in Germline Genome Editing as, quote, irresponsible. So, just some brief background. I think it was in 2017 or 18. This researcher named He Jian Q, which I've probably mispronounced, but he gene edited these twin girls and made them immune to HIV. This is like this major experiment that he ran on living people, and he didn't have approval to do this. And he ended up going to jail, and I forget how much they fined him, but they fined him a bunch of money, and he just sort of like disappeared one day, if I remember correctly. Like somebody got up mad, they're like, "Nope, see you later." But he's out now, and he says he's doing more responsible research. But it sounds like this probably had a very significant impact on the regulatory environment over there. So they're just coming out now and they're saying,
Yeah.
none of this. It's unethical. You can't do it. You've heard similar things from us. We're not authoritarian communists, but we have expressed, or at least I have, Liza can speak for herself, but I have expressed some concern about how these technologies are used, how they're going to be regulated, who gets to decide what's an ethical use, what's an unethical use, who pays for what, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, who knows what's going to come of this? I'm sort of encouraged to see a world power like China come out and go pump the brakes.
Hmm.
Let's just hold this, and before we
Yeah.
run headlong into this. So maybe you could explain. Some people that are listening will know, but what is germline editing?
Yeah. So germline editing is um, taking DNA in a very, 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 very early cell. So a sperm or an egg or an embryo, and changing the DNA in that very, very, very early stage. And so, in this particular case, it sounded like, oh, what's wrong with that? He made two babies that are, immune to HIV. Problem is that you make genetic changes in very, very, very early um, stages. Those genetic changes then can get passed on through the following generation. So not only are you making changes for the embryo that becomes a person uh, who has had no say in whether or not this was something that they wanted to do. That there's a that informed consent is really one of the big huge things about doing research on people, right? So they have had no say on that, but then their future offspring can carry that as well, and they've had no say. So if you don't know what the in the very, very early stages, if you don't know the impact that you're having when you're changing that DNA, um, you may be causing heritable problems because we don't have a good enough understanding of how these cells interact and how they mature and differentiate and things like that. So while on the surface it sounds wonderful to cure HIV, we have over millennia evolved to have mutations that confer benefit on humanity. So some of the mutations that are conferred, and I don't know how to put this in a way. Let's see. So, for example, if you have sickle cell disease, that's a terrible disease, right? It causes strokes. This red blood cells sickle. They cause clotting in the microcirculation. It's very painful. It's horrible. But if you are heterozygous, meaning that your mom has given you a normal gene and your dad has given you an abnormal gene for that disease, you are protected against malaria. And that really helped people survive, right? Same thing with cystic fibrosis. If your dad gave you a healthy gene and your mom gave you an unhealthy gene, a lot of people think that that conferred a protection against cholera. So when you erase certain genes with the idea that you want to give benefit, you may not be aware of why they evolved to be that way in the first place. And are you conferring susceptibility to illness that way? And so there's, and that's a big issue. So basically what you do with gene editing in these cases is you do in vitro fertilization, you get an embryo, you can genetically modify this embryo to have a variety of different features. If it's disease resistant, then that might be a good thing. But where do you go when you're talking about designer babies? This to me is eugenics on steroids, and I think we need to maybe. I'm not denying the fact that there could be really good benefits for disease prevention, but by the same token, there could be really concerning outcomes.
I wrote an article about this a couple years ago. It's called "Can We Outlaw Sexual Reproduction?" Well, designer baby revolution. Can we outlaw sexual reproduction? And I called it that because there are really smart, really powerful people affiliated with the World Health Organization and other big public health institutions that are seriously proposing that we eliminate sexual reproduction. Right? You'll still have sex for fun and pleasure and everything, pair bonding, but you won't reproduce because don't you know that's just so risky, right? If we can reproduce people in the lab, then we can totally control the process and it'll be so much better. And it won't be just optional; it'll be the way that we do this, just like we mandate vaccines. And the person who I heard made that argument was Jamie Metzel. Sharp guy. He knows a lot about this topic. Wrote a book called Hacking Darwin, which I really recommend if you want to learn about this. But the argument he made, it was on this podcast several years ago, he said, just like we mandate vaccines for kids going to school because there's a risk of disease transmission, we can do this. In that, if we can say to parents, there's a significant risk that your child's going to be born with a very serious condition, we're going to require you to do this, so the child is going to be born healthy. I don't know what to say to that except that is totalitarianism, like mm-hmm. in your bedroom, your lineage mm-hmm. will be dictated by bureaucrats in Europe, people that mm-hmm. you have no relationship with, you didn't vote for them, you can't interact with them, they get to decide really really intimate questions about your bodily autonomy, and that's just the start of it. But that is I don't know how. I mean, you think the bug eating thing is controversial?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's exactly right. I don't know. I think this is concerning to me. I think that I'm actually kind of impressed that China went this way, given its totalitarian nature. But I think that that there is that having and bearing children is a superpower that women have. And I'm sort of watching the West erase women, and I find it very, very concerning. I mean, we can take one little dinky sperm, one cell, and turn it into a full-grown live human being, which is amazing, and that quality is becoming less and less valued. And so, what I don't want to see happen to women is have them be turned into just pure objects of desire, because that objectifies women. And I think that it's really important that reproduction is one of it to me is probably the most amazing feat, because you can take a single cell and turn it into a complete individual with personality and ideas and greatness. And so when you take the wonder out of that, and just make sex and just an objective thing for fun, I think you take the value out of humanity. And I don't know, maybe people have philosophical ideas that are different than that, and I'm open to listening to that. But I think that's having children means that you are committed to something that is greater than yourself. Growing them to be exactly like in a test tube, to be exactly like the way you want them to be, and they probably won't turn out that way, regardless. But it's going to be, very disappointing to you when they don't turn out that way. But it's concerning to me.
Yeah, I get the sense that a lot of the people pushing this, they don't really think through the ethics or the philosophy of it. It's just sort of this like technocratic. Wouldn't it be great if we could control everything with a few dials and some test tubes? That really strikes me as the extent of it. And they will say things like, we're gonna have this dialogue, this interfaith dialogue, and everyone's gonna say their piece, and then we're gonna go ahead and do what we want to do anyway, which is remake humanity. Yeah. It's right. So thoroughly insane.
And imagine that it's not going to be human. Like imagine that it's not going to be the way human beings are. If you grow them in a test tube, if you do whatever, they're still going to be their own human beings with their own ideas and their own civil rights and things like that. And so, how far are you willing to go to infringe on those rights?
Ooh.
I mean, the same people will talk about eugenics and how terrible eugenics is, and then they promote this, which is like the ultimate in eugenics.
Well, see, this is different because they're in charge and they're so upstanding and benevolent,
and they know how to do it right.
So you can trust them.
Yeah. It's just like communism. If you have the right people do communism always works out.
Yeah. When RFK cites sucky epidemiology, it's just sucky epidemiology. But when a scientist cites sucky epidemiology, well, then it's, this is the sort of thing I'm getting at.
Like it's the truth.
The standards are different depending on who's saying it. There's so many risks here. I mean, just one more thing. They calculate what's called a polygenic risk score, which is a correlation between some genetic mutation and some health outcome. And so you can look at this in someone's genome, you can say, oh, well, this person, has an elevated risk of whatever condition. But you don't actually know if that's the case. It's just a correlation.
It's
so
a correlation, yeah.
Yeah. If you start going into someone's genome and making SNPs and edits and without knowing what you're doing, I mean, like,
you don't know what those SNPs and edits are the downstream effects of them. Right? Are you increasing their risk of diabetes? Are you increasing their risk of cancer? Are you by an oncogene that you're now not, or like a tumor suppressor gene that you've turned off, that you weren't aware was a tumor suppressor gene? I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, this is not herbicide tolerant cotton, which we love, right?
No,
right?
This is not. It's people.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we'll move on here. I'm getting worked up. Read G.K. Chesterton's book Eugenics and Other Evils. He wrote that in the 1920s, so he's not talking about germline editing, but he's talking about eugenics, which was sort of
editing people.
Yeah, it was like the rough dumb guy version of this, where you just control who gets to reproduce with whom,
have babies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you
Hmm.
had these upper echelon academics talking about arranging marriages, right? Right, right. Today you hear about that and like, oh, that's that backwards, unsophisticated weirdo practice, from all of those barbarian religions. And in the 20th century, you had
No,
really,
it was the elite.
yeah, yeah. Go read that book because I think he demolishes most of the arguments in favor of this. So, anyways, let's move
Hmm.
on, or I'll keep blabbing. Next up, I love this story. This is called "Losing Weight Can Cause Cancer." Here's how epidemiologists can skew science to fit ideological viewpoints. This is by Hank Campbell, who is the publisher of a great website called Science 2.0. Um, Full disclosure, where I had my first science journalism internship, so I'm not unbiased on the topic. But this is still a very good. This is still a very good article. Hank here, he's talking about a specific study, but the more general point that is more interesting is how epidemiology started out as a very useful field because they would find correlations that were potentially significant and that needed to be followed up on. So, for example, smoking and lung cancer. Um, it was
Hmm.
epidemiology that really discovered that association, and it was so overwhelming that we could be confident that smoking at least contributed to lung cancer, even if you didn't know clinically, right? Because you're not going to do a clinical trial where you give, one group a pack of Marlboros every day, and then you're going to have a control group that doesn't, right? That would be
That's
hopelessly
right.
unethical to give people cigarettes. But anyways,
That's right.
epidemiology originally, like in the first half of the 20th century, I guess you would say, they were very cautious and they designed very good studies, and they followed people
Hmm.
for decades. And this is how we discovered lung cancer and smoking, and some other really important associations, right? Diet and heart disease and so forth.
Hmm.
These were very, very good
Hmm.
studies. But what happened in more recent years is you had, I guess he says, starting in the 1980s, you had major medical schools like like Yale School of Public Health. They would come like they were running out of real things to study. And Jeffrey Cabot, who is a cancer epidemiologist, has made this point. They basically ran out of real associations to find, so they started doing risk factor epidemiology, where you're like, well, if you walk on the right side of the street 3 days out of the week, you have a 27% increased risk of dying of leukemia. Like it was these kind of studies, and I'm being facetious on purpose. That's hyperbolic, but basically you're saying this one behavior you engage in contributes to your risk for a certain health outcome, and then when
That's
you
right.
combine
That's
it
what.
with
Yeah. That's a.
yeah, you combine it with 15 other things, and then that's how you know that you're in trouble. And so basically, you can get to a point where you're basically drawing correlations between anything. And I'm gonna
That's
go,
right.
I'm gonna go take care of my kid when Liza's gonna explain a little more about epidemiology.
Yes. Now, I want to preface this because I think epidemiology is very, very, very important. It picks up on things that are able correlations that you can further study and show if there is an association and a significant association between a behavior and a health outcome. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to epidemiology in general, but so I think it's a very important field. But what I do think also is that a lot of people are looking for research grants, and a lot of newspapers and media outlets are looking for clicks so they can make some money. And so you will see every week a claim that, this food is associated with some poor outcome, Alzheimer's, heart disease, obesity, things like that. Or you will find this exposure is associated with, some bad outcome, and it'll get amplified through all sorts of social media channels, media, general media, and before you know it, everybody's like bending over backwards to avoid meat or plant-based diets or chemical exposures or just the things that make your everyday existence possible. So I think there's too much fear that's built around these studies and too much hype that's put in these studies. Now, this particular study I thought was absolutely hilarious because the claim was that weight loss, sudden, unexpected weight loss, was associated with an increased risk of cancer. So, what are one of the things that make you go to the doctor to find out what's going on if you've got sudden, unexpected weight loss? Uh, Cancer itself causes sudden, unexpected weight loss. So, I am not in the least bit surprised that they found more people who had recent weight loss, diagnosed with cancer, because that is one of the clinical things that happens that makes people go to the doctor to get diagnosed. So once again, it's a big nothing burger. But I'm not going to tell people who are obese not to lose weight, because oh my gosh, losing weight might be associated with cancer. So this is a clear example of true, and unrelated. So yeah, I think it's it, it shows you it shows we talk about these other correlations, right? That people, Stephanie Snuff loves to make the claim that glyphosate is the increased use of glyphosate in the 90s and 2000s is associated with an increase in autism. Well, you can just say the same thing about the increase in the consumption of organic food, um, right? Is associated with the increase in autism. There, you can make correlations till the cows come home. But what is it? What's different between correlation and causation? Why were epidemiologists able to talk about tobacco actually being a carcinogen? They were able to do that because they had the followed Bradford Hill criteria. They said it has to be more rigorous than just we saw this exposure and this outcome. They may not be related, but you have to have things like reproducibility, biologic plausibility. You have to be able to do it in a lab and show a mechanistic way of why this causes this. And we have all those things with tobacco, and we have all those things with benzene, for example. But we don't have them for a lot of other claims that people like to make. But there's a whole lot of money to be made from a whole variety. If you're an epidemiologic researcher or a doctor in the NIH and you have a theory and you really want to prove that theory and your grant money depends on that, you're going to hype up those claims. Just like, and I'm not saying all doctors do this, and not all science researchers do this, but if you are if you are a journalist and you're working for a magazine, that magazine needs to make money, so you're going to sell a sensational story. There are all sorts of layers to this that make it much more interesting and enticing to talk about hyperbolic science rather than very boring science that's the truth.
I just saw another example that's being heralded all over Twitter by all of our friends. it's is a study in JAMA concluding that the more strict COVID policies reduced excess mortality. So the states that followed all the rules did a little bit better. Uh, and what's remarkable to me is that all the people who are normally going on about bad epidemiology and like if the study I'm talking about, if it were about multivitamins, everybody would be ripping it apart because it's garbage, right? It's self-reported data about did you wear a mask outside, how much time did you spend in your house before the pandemic versus how much time did you report spending outside after the pandemic, right? So you take those kind of metrics, which are loosey goosey and totally unreliable, and then you correlate them with excess deaths or whatever outcome you're looking at. It's just bad science. It's not good research. But because
No,
they're
but
for go ahead.
so the thing is that's like that's a bias in and of itself, and you are expecting your own data to support what you think, right? And so it's a you are going to be more inclined to believe data that you perceive to be true, regardless of whether the science is true, and regardless of whether you could take two studies that make the same claims with opposite outcomes. And depending on your political persuasion, you're going to use that study, whichever study you prefer. And so I think that there has to be a consistent approach to studies that don't necessarily prove what your agenda is. And I'm not saying that agenda is necessarily a bad thing. I'm saying that you have to be open to the fact that you might be wrong about something.
Yeah, like locking people in their homes is horribly unethical and cruel, and it has serious downsides. And because you're insulated in academia, you didn't feel any of those, and so you keep putting these asinine studies out. Here's the line. This is from the paper itself. I swear I don't make this up. They write this and put it in the article. Data were not available on the exact timing of some policies, requiring the use of dummy variables rather than more precise measures. What are we doing here? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Dummy variables? What's a dummy variable?
That's right.
Goodness
That's
gracious.
right. We decided that we were gonna put something in there just to make it. We were gonna torture the data until he confessed.
I mean, it's if RFK does it, science is going to hell in a handbasket, right?
Right.
If JAMA does
But
it,
if
we're all gonna seal clap. Yay! Yay! Thank you for locking us in our homes. It works so good. Give me a break.
Or
Okay.
like keeping kids out of school for 3 years. Keeping kids that to me, keeping kids out of school for 3 years probably will be the most egregious thing we ever did. You can't get those years back. Those are foundational years, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost like for 3 years, medical training, most people, all they saw was COVID. And I think it's had a negative effect on medical training. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah. I could go on, right? Dissolved marriages, people getting addicted to drugs, people with severe mental health issues that go into remission because you lock them in their apartments and you take away everything that gives their life meaning. They can't go see their therapist. Students that can't go to school.
They can't go to the beach.
It's just, I don't know. Just say you're sorry. We got it wrong. We're sorry. That's it. That's it. It'll go so far. No more sucky epidemiology. Just say sorry. That's it. Okay. All right.
But to all of the epidemiologists out there that are really good epidemiologists, it is a valuable tool, and I think it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Hammers are good for hanging up pictures, but don't hit yourself on the thumb with one. That's bad. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. There are epidemiologists who are begging their colleagues to give up these stupid study designs. Mm-hmm. You can go read the articles. They're like, guys, we got to stop doing this because we are wasting time and we're pissing everyone off and we're losing all of our credibility. Yep. So, anyways, I'm doing you a favor. I'm trying to help you. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay.
That's right.
I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Losing weight does not cause cancer. All right. In case you needed that.
No, it doesn't. FYI.
Okay. All right. Final article of the day. Whew. This is from The Conversation. This is by Josie Young. I may have mispronounced it. I'm sorry. Anyways, article's called "Why Are People Suffering from Rising Mental Health Issues? Our Culture and Environments Might Be Changing Too Fast for Evolution to Keep Up." This is really fascinating, Liza. They're talking here in so many words about modernization, right? If you look at us over our evolutionary history, we lived in small bands, we were mobile, and then we settled down with agriculture, which was a significant change, as we talk about all the time. But then you get to the Industrial Revolution, you have these massive innovations, right? People start building cities, you start crowding people together. In urban centers like New York or San Francisco or whatever. And this is fundamentally different from the way that we evolved, right? I mean, you're constantly exposed to light. There's noise everywhere. It's crowded. It's congested. There's a lot of benefit to cities too, right? There's all sorts of culture. And if you want to enjoy music or art or whatever, that's all in the cities. But they're noticing, and there's a lot of studies cited in this article, they're noticing that people are starting to struggle with all sorts of, right, isolation, depression, all of these things that are kind of strange, right? I mean, you're surrounded by people in a giant city, but people are sort of becoming atomized, and the thesis here is that we're basically not equipped to live in an environment like this. It reminds me a lot of the hypothesis that we're surrounded by cheap calories, and we have
Yeah.
convenience everywhere, and we don't have to exercise. Right? You can work from a desk, you can turn on your TV and be entertained. Someone will bring food to your door. Right? There's no need to go to the gym or go run laps or do push-ups. So I think that's sort of what they're going for here. Is there's just a mismatch between our genes and our environment, and that is leading to some negative consequences.
Well, I think that there are all sorts of interesting things about this article. I think that this kind of romanticizing subsistence farming and the existence of the family and childbearing and all of this stuff that is not supposed to be wonderful, right? But then they are like on the flip side, there are so many people who want to do 15-minute cities and have everything delivered to your door and have everything be remote and this, that, and the other. And so it's schizophrenic. The whole thing is schizophrenic. I think that everything, and the whole discussion about sugar too, right? In the article, they talk about how, the obesity epidemic is being caused by the addiction to sugar, and that may be because of our genes that we're addicted to sugar. So long and short is we do not know what to do as a society with the success that we have. We've never before in our entire lives, or in the existence of humanity, had such an abundance of food, entertainment, constant input all of the time. I am not surprised that with all of the clickbait and all of like the discussion that we just had, that everybody spends all their time, even though they're frolicking in this abundant wealth, that they are all on the verge of catastrophe and death all the time. So I think that is what is contributing to this societal malaise. If people would decide to maybe get out of themselves and not navel gaze and think about what they could do to make society a better place and then actually go do it, and spend some time walking around in nature and spend some time thinking happy thoughts. See, like right there, right there. That would be a wonderful way to relieve people's anxiety. I think that life's great and we don't appreciate how hard it can be. And somebody's having the same predicament at the moment. So there we go. Cameron's daughter is telling her daddy that she is distressed right now. So hence the pause. Hence pause. But anyway, long and short is we are in very, very good shape in terms of what we have access to. We have an abundant food supply. We have an incredible lifespan. We've had 5 public health innovations that absolutely revolutionized the 20th century. Those are water sanitation, vaccination, antibiotics, food security, and vector control. And those things brought us a 35-year increase in life expectancy. And now we're spending all of our time navel gazing, talking about how depressed we are, and how, that's because of our ill health, our, sort of addiction to sugar, our addiction to the internet, and how life should be better. And if we're so busy comparing ourselves to other people that we've forgotten how difficult it could be. And so I think they did have some good advice in this article, in that they were talking about, go walk in nature, go get outside of yourself. And I think that's excellent advice. A little bit of exercise, a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of not self-help books, because all you're doing is focusing on your navel. Look at things that are bigger than you. And when you focus on things that are bigger than you and you try to make those things work, I think that is a recipe for finding some contentment.
Yes, I think you're right about that. I do find something sort of amusing about this article in that, and you sort of touched on this, right? Like they're recognizing that for at least some people, the way we're organized into these crowded urban centers, it's not good. But they don't say, well, what we need to do is we need to space people out, right? We need more suburbs, and we need more people to have more access to space, right? They don't say
Hmm.
that in the story, right? Yeah, go into nature, have a nature bath, and sort of soak in all of the beauty, but then go back
Do
to your
yoga.
right. Yeah, but
That's
then go back
exactly
to your
right.
studio apartment that costs more than a mortgage used to, and wait for us to drone you in your food for the week. Right.
Right, which they in the 15-minute city thing. Oh, this is all going to be really, really healthy.
Yeah. Something else. This is more fundamental, but the psychiatrist Theodore Dalrymple wrote a book called Life at the Bottom. It's a collection of essays. It's a really good book though because he's talking about he spent his career in London treating poor people who were drug addicts and absentee parents and just like people that just end up or stay at the bottom. And he's talking about how they get there and why they stay there. And in the first part, the very first chapter of the book, he says in the 20th century we started pushing these ideas into the culture of the meaninglessness of life, right? Like your existence is no different than an amoeba bumping around looking for something to eat. And when you're an academic or you're a high-powered lawyer or whatever, like these are these sort of like chic academic ideas. You're like, well,
Yeah.
maybe there's no such thing as reality. Maybe it's a simulation, man. Like it's this sort of fun intellectual exercise if you have lots of money and you're well established. But for poor people that are coming out of a dysfunctional environment, if you tell them
Hmm.
nothing you do matters, your life will amount to nothing in the end. So do whatever you want. When you give people that message,
Exactly.
that's like
They do
well, if
whatever they want, and
right,
it's
if yeah, go ahead, please.
you keep on digging, you keep on digging, digging. But some people, I mean, that's the whole thing. If you really want to truly improve society, you give people hope, right? That they can overcome their circumstances. There are people who are at rock bottom, and really incredible people that start out at rock bottom, and then they can elevate themselves if they have hope. But if they are, of the persuasion, oh, I'm just here and I might as well live it up while I'm here, that they engage in behaviors that can be self-destructive, and it promotes self-destruction. And I think that that's not meant to be judgmental. I feel sorry for people who are in that, but I feel like that's happened a lot with medicine. The profession, that it's kind of taken a nosedive, partially because physicians often come from a background aren't that have not been exposed to that kind of thing. We're exposed to patients that have difficult backgrounds, and we try to be empathetic with them. But many physicians have not been bootstraps up, and so they don't have the experience of living in situations like that. And so some of the prescriptions they're calling for in terms of policy, I think, is really destructive for poor people, and amplifies problems. That's not to say that they're not doing it because they want to be empathetic and non-judgmental and all of this stuff, but I don't know that they have to live with the ramifications of some of the recommendations they make, and their children don't have to live with those recommendations. And I think it would behoove us to listen to people who do have to live with those ramifications, and really take that seriously.
One other example from Life at the Bottom, he talks. I won't name him, but he talks about another well-known academic who wrote a book about why people don't have to learn proper English. They need functional language. So if they speak, they speak English, but they don't know any of the grammatical rules and they can't read very well, but they can communicate with each other. Well, then that's okay. And Dalrymple points out, this book was written in perfect prose, right? Every comma is in place. It's very professionally written. It's from a major publishing house. But nonetheless, it's a manual for telling a huge segment of society that they shouldn't better themselves, right? And so,
Right, and that's yeah.
yeah.
You need excellence. You need
Hmm.
excellence. You need people to try to achieve. You need people to try to rise above the circumstances of their own existence,
Hmm.
and when they do incredible things. And to just relegate everybody to the status of an amoeba, well, you might as well just have fun because it's all done in a short amount of time. that's yeah. I think it's destructive. And I think that it's funny. I don't want to go down a religious bent, but I do think that, the modern skeptics and the new atheists are kind of wondering that there's been a vacuum created in Western society. And I think we're seeing it now. And I think people are very concerned about how it's going. It gets filled with ideology. And I think it's important for people to try to. Human beings have done incredible things. I mean, Norman Borlaug fed 1 billion people. That's unheard of, right? People have gone to the moon, and that's because somebody really strove to create something magical and wonderful and unheard of. To squelch that, because we're all, exactly the same, is disappointing. Especially when
Yeah.
we've got so much wealth and privilege, and we can actually do this.
Yeah, but that's the fascinating thing, right? I mean, by historical standards, we're insanely wealthy, and the fact that we're having these
Mm-hmm.
issues is really striking. One other thing along the same lines, she points out, or the author points out in this story, people they're less likely to buy homes, they're not getting married, they're not even having romantic partners. But this is another one of those instances where it's like, well, what have we told people for decades, right? Like you don't need the nuclear family. I mean, you can have one if you want, but what do you want to do,
But
right?
that's going
Go
to really hold you back. Kids are
right,
going to hold you back. Yeah.
right, right. So again, these are the sort of messages. They're sort of built into the culture. They're baked into the cake that people are served all of their childhoods, and then they get into their mid 20s and they go, "Oh, what am I doing? What's the point of all this? I'm really frustrated. I need antidepressants." Right? Like
Yeah.
you take away the things that people derive meaning from and the reasons that they work hard. Like why go to work and work hard? Well, if you have young children at home and you have a wife or you have a husband, you have people that are dependent on you and that you're dependent on, and right, this creates really healthy incentives, but we've taken all that away. And then people are
And
like, wow.
and it makes you have to negotiate with people. And if you have to negotiate with people in your immediate surroundings and learn how to do that, you can negotiate with the rest of the world. It's how treaties are built, right? This is being so fulminantly independent that you can't have a disagreement with other people. You can't even learn how to navigate that. And then being so fulminantly lonely because you can't build these
Yeah.
relationships. That's problematic. That's problematic. So my advice would be to maybe get into places where you meet people who might not agree with you, learn from them, and then try to build positive relationships out of these things. Go talk to. I would love to see a absolute Biden supporter university student sit down and have a conversation with an absolute Trump supporter university student, although there are probably just about two of those. I would love to see them actually try to have a civil conversation because I think everybody kind of wants the same thing. They want health, they want, interesting jobs, they want good families, they all want the same thing, but there are different ways of getting there. But if we're going to sit and fight with each other, that's not the way to build those bridges. And I think that that's what this article is pointing to, is the kind of collapse of trust in society.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very taxing to just argue with people because you're not really meant for that. You can tolerate it when you have to, but You're not meant for it. We'll wrap up here. There's a great book I read years ago. It's called The Quest for Community. It's by a sociologist named Robert Nisbet. Really fascinating, but he talks about how you have these local institutions like the family or the church or the bowling league or the kids softball team. These things, these mold people together into communities, and it keeps them sane.
That's right.
Because they're living with other people, right? Everyone always says, "Oh, we're social animals. This is how we're supposed to live around other people," but over time, those have been pulled away, and we're seeing what we're seeing. And Liza actually said this a little bit ago. You said people fall into ideology, right? They don't have a church anymore. They don't have a synagogue anymore, or whatever. So they fall into whatever the political situation is.
There's a vacuum.
Right. Some kind of mysticism or some sort of philosophy that doesn't actually supply them with anything they need, but it gives them something to focus on. Like, well, it's the bad guys over there. The bad guys took all the
That's
stuff,
right.
and now we got to kill the bad guys. Right? This is how. This is
how it evolves.
Book. Yes. Yeah. So
it's how it evolves, and we've seen it over and over and over. And so, yeah, I think that we might think that we're too sophisticated for this, and we're not.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of community, go follow us on Twitter. It's at Dr. Liza MD, at Kim J English. We have spaces every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Everybody's welcome. We want to hear your questions and your opinions. Basically, we pick a different science topic every week or every few weeks, and then we talk about how it impacts trust in science. So for the last 3 weeks, we were talking about drugs and opioids and addiction and pain management, all that stuff. We'll pick something else next week. But come, it's a great time. And it's funny, there's a lot of people with different perspectives, but when you're actually engaging with someone in real time, the tendency to be a jerk dissipates. You're not as inclined to do it. Yeah, because you're right next, you're like, oh, there's another person that can hear my voice. I can't just yell at them.
Yes, I can't just yell into the void. Right? Yeah. Well, we keep our spaces that way, though. There are some spaces that are a real Jerry Springer kind of thing, but we really try to keep our spaces where people can have it's an exchange of ideas. It's like the salons in the 19th century where people would go and have intellectual conversations in each other's living rooms, and now these are virtual living rooms.
Yes. So if you're going to use social media, this is a great way to do it, right? Real conversations with people. So go and check those out. Thank you, as always, for listening. We will be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, have a lovely week, everybody.
You too.